Hello everybody, let's cut to the chase. We are almost done with this video series. You almost have your game engine ready to go. You are almost ready to make any type of 2D game your heart desires. But we have a few more things we need to tidy up to finish this series. So the first thing I would like to look at is in the Utilities folder. There is a class called Global. This is the last class in Utilities that we have not used yet. So let me explain the purpose of this. So, a lot of times when you're working on your game, you'll be in the player class or some type of game object class, and at the very end of a level, you detect that the level is done. Maybe you reach a certain position, or you get a certain score, and the level is over. You need a way to call load level in the game 1 class. So, whenever we have a class like this called Global, we can store an instance to the game 1 class, which has that function. And we can also put some other things in here, little helper variables or even helper functions that we would want to access all throughout the code. Because this is a static class, we have access to global anywhere. So we should already have this in the utilities folder. All we need to do is call initialize, so this will be super easy. Let's go to game1.cs, and then in the game1 initialize function, we can call global.initialize, and then pass in this. And now if we are in our player.cs class or any type of game object class, we can always have access to the game1 class by calling global.game, and then any function in here we now have access to. So there's load level, and then we would just pass in the level we want to load. We do need to fix up our load level function to work that way. Right now we're just hard coding the decorations and the objects that we want. We need the ability to actually save a file from our editor and then load it in using this function. So how about we press F5 and let's try to save out the current level we have as a file, and we'll see what happens. Alright, the game has started. Let's go to File, Save As, and then here we have the ability to save out a Jorge file. And whenever I taught a class last year at a college, there was a student in there named Jorge, and we were trying to figure out what we should call our level files, and someone said .Jorge, so that's stuck. So shout out to Jorge there. You can change the name of the file. If you go into the editor.cs class, you can find where it says .Jorge and change that to be .whatever you want. But underneath, this is just an XML file. Okay? So let's go ahead and say level1.Jorge. Let's press save. And looks like there was an error. Let's see what it says. There was an error reflecting type game engine level data. There was an error reflecting property objects. You need to add XML choice identifier attribute to the object's member. So whenever it's saying something like this, that usually means we have not set up our XML attribute tags or the XML element tags that we were working with in the last video. I'm going to hit OK and then exit out. Let's go to our level data.cs class and let's see if you can identify what the problem is. So let's look at this objects list here. Is there anything not right about these XML element tags here? Yeah, there is. And I actually noticed this in the last video. Whenever I was rewatching it, I forgot to change this right here to be type of enemy instead of type of player. So that's most likely why it was throwing the error. Let's try it again. I'll hit F5. Alright, now we can go to File, Save As, and then let's say Level 1. We will replace it, and it looks like it was saved out. I'm going to go to my desktop, which is where I saved it, and here is level1.Jorge. It is 2.5 kilobytes, so it looks like some data is inside. Let's go ahead and bring this over to our engine. So if we go up to our content folder here, let's create a new folder to store all of our levels. I will call this folder levels. Simple enough. And then let's drag the level1.jorge file into the levels folder. Let's go to the properties of level 1, and we need to set copy to output directory as copy if newer. That way this file gets copied next to the exe. Now we should have our file inside of our game engine content folder. Let's return to game1.cs and fix up our load level function to load in this file. So the first thing I want to do at the very top is say global.levelName equals a variable called file name. And we need to have a parameter up here called string file name. And whatever this file name is that gets passed into load level, that's the name of the file we're trying to load. So if we are trying to load level1.jorge, that's what this string would say. And then we will store the name of that file into our global.levelName variable. That way, in our game later on, if we ever want to check and see what level we are currently in, we have an easy to access variable right here that tells us what level is currently loaded. Next, we need to actually load the data. And remember, we have a class called levelData, and that is where our data is loaded and saved. So we'll want to load in an instance of that class. And to load in level data stuff, we use that class we worked on in the last video called XML helper. We'll call XML helper.load, and we will pass in the file path. So let's say content levels, and then plus file name. Now that we've loaded in a instance of level data, we can just set all of the things in our game engine to what was loaded in. So let's say map.walls equals leveldata.walls. Oops. Map.decor equals leveldata.decor. Our objects list can be set to the level data's objects list. And then, since now we are loading this in the proper way, let's erase these lines right here where we were adding a player, an enemy, 2 walls, and this background decoration. Now we are loading that in from the file that was saved out. Let's keep these 2 lines here, map.loadMap and loadObjects. We still need to call that on the stuff that was loaded in here. Now we can call loadLevel and pass in the file name. So how about we go up to the loadLevel function here. It's currently throwing an error because we're not passing anything in. So let's fix that. Let's pass in level1.jorge. And now we can press F5. And we should see that same level before. And we do. Awesome. But now we are loading it in properly from the XML.jorge file. Awesome stuff. And that's pretty much it, everyone. That's the last piece that you need to fill in here. Now you have an entire game engine that can make 2D games. You have an editor over here where you can design your level, and then you can save out and load that level. One thing I would say is that once you save out the level and put it into your content folder, I would make sure that whenever you are saving out the changes to your level, make sure you're saving the changes to the .jorge file that is in your content folder in your project directory, right? Because right now I have 2 instances of that file. I have the one that I initially saved onto my desktop. I should erase that one now. And then I have the version that I added into the content folder. So we should be working from the one that's in the content folder. That way, whenever we save our changes and restart the game, the appropriate file has been updated with our changes. Now, I want to show you one other thing, and basically I want to show you the workflow that you'll be using a lot to create your game. So most likely what you'll be doing at this point is just creating new game objects, and then you will make those game objects derive from either the character class, the game object class, or the animated object class, depending on what you want it to do. And then you're just going to fill out the functionality for each object. All of this hardcore back-end programming stuff that we've been doing in this series, you will most likely never have to touch most of that code again. You will most likely, at this point, be creating new game objects for whatever game you're working on, and then in the editor here, you'll be adding those objects and designing your level, and then adding in decorations to make things look pretty, and adding in walls, of course, too. So let's just pretend that we're working on our game now, and I'd like to add a power-up inside of our level, and when you run into the power-up, it plays a little animation that goes away, and maybe you get a score or something like that. But I just want to run you through the entire process of creating a new game object, implementing some basic gameplay functionality, and then having it drag and drop from the editor here. Alright? So let's exit out. And I'm going to go to the Michael Hicks toolbox and go to the Michael Arts Animation Editor. The first thing that I'd like to do is create an animation from the Orbs sprite sheet that's in the art folder in the toolbox. So let's load in an image. And let's navigate to the Michael Hicks Toolbox art folder, and then let's load in the orb sheet image here. Alright, so this sheet is also based in 128 by 128, so each frame here is 128 by 128. We don't have to change anything. We just need to extend the X and Y grid here to fit all of the images. And let's make an idle left animation. This will be what the orb looks like when it's just sitting there waiting to be picked up. I'm going to click these frames here, and I'm going to set the speed to 5 and hit play there, and we have a little orb that's rotating. Maybe that's a little fast. Maybe we want speed of 8. Yeah, that's probably a little better. Let's say speed 8. And then let's create another new animation here. We'll make one more, and this time we will call the animation pick up. Capital P, capital U, space in the middle. Let's add the frames here. And then I'm going to press play, and notice how it's a little animation there of the orb dissolving. Let's speed that up a little bit. I'm going to say 5, maybe even. How about that? Let's do 2, because I feel like this should be a really fast animation. I'm going to hit stop, and then now we can save out this animation. So I'm going to say save as, and then for now I will save this animation in the Michael Hicks toolbox. I will call it Powerup. It's been saved, so I will exit out. Now we need to add the image of this sprite into our content folder. I believe we have already done that though. See, here it is here, orbsheet.png, but normally whenever you're doing this process, you will need to add the image in, alright, and then make sure the build action is set to content, and the copy to output directory option is copy if newer. So we've already done that. We're good to go. Next, we need to add the animation file into our animations folder. So I'm going to drag and drop that A&M file in here. And then I'm going to click the properties of Powerup and say copy to output directory, copy if newer, just like the shyboy.A&M. Now we have the animation file in our engine. We can start loading all this stuff in. So I'm going to create a new class. I will right click Game Engine and go to Add Class, and I'm going to call this class Powerup. Just like that. First thing we need to do is all of the routine stuff we do when we create a new class. So I'm going to go to gameObject.cs and copy and paste the using statements and make the class public. Now we need to decide which parent class we need to derive from. What type of functionality will this class have? We can derive from gameObject, which is basically the base class. So all it does is draw and have the ability to set a position for where you want this image to draw. Then we have the animated object class, which is an object that animates. And we also have the character class, which is an object that can animate but also move around, and it has some physics for jumping and collision detection. That class is more for people or AI characters in your world. I'm going to say the Powerup class needs to derive from animated object. It's not a class that will move around. It just needs to stand there and animate, basically. Let's create an empty constructor called Powerup. It's very important that you make these empty constructors, because whenever you're saving out the .jorge XML file, XML is looking for empty constructors like this to save out the data. So if you don't have this and you save out your file, XML will crash and you'll see an error on the screen. Let's also make a constructor here that takes in a vector2 called input position. I like to make these constructors because if during the gameplay we want to create a new instance of a Powerup, we can use this constructor to immediately set the position we want this Powerup to start at. So I'll say position equals start position. Next, we need to override the initialize function from gameObject. And here all we need to do is say collidable equals false. Remember, the collidable bool is what tells our engine if this object should have collision detection. So if collidable was set to true and the player walked up against the orb would stop the player from moving. And that's not the behavior that we want. We want the player to walk through the orb, and as the player walks through the orb, it's picked up and plays an animation, so the collidable bool has to be false. Next, we need to override the load function, but actually if you go to the Michael Hicks toolbox and you go to the how-to folder, I have a text file here called how to add new objects. And this text file will basically walk you through everything I'm talking about right now. But there's a chunk of code here that is for overriding the load function. Let's copy that and then paste it back in Visual Studio. This is useful because I have all of the basic things you'll need to do ready to go here. So we just need to walk through this and change the variables. So the image that we're trying to load is not sprite sheet. We are trying to load orb sheet, all lowercase, so I'm going to change that. The animation that we're trying to load here is not called Shy Boy. We called that animation Powerup. So let's change that. Let's immediately change to our default animation. I believe we defined an idle left animation. I think I called it idle left. So that should be fine. Then we'll call base.load. And then if we want to customize the bounding box, so maybe the collision detection is starting too early, and we want the bounding box to be perfectly around that blue orb and not have any excess space, we could play with the numbers here to make the bounding box be a tighter fit. Alright, that should be done. We've loaded in all of the image and animation stuff. Now we can say public override void update. And in this function, all we have to do is implement the gameplay logic. So in a little bit, we can make it where when we detect a collision with the player, we add a score, something along those lines. And then finally, the last thing I believe we will need in this class is the update animations function. And again, you can copy and paste a chunk of code here in that text file. It has everything set up and ready to go. So all you have to do is override the update animations function like this, and then right here at the bottom you can program your logic for changing the animations. We'll do that in just a second. But remember that in the editor for the animation, we defined an animation called pickup. So because that's a new animation we haven't added before, we need to go to our animated object class over here. And in this enumeration right here, where it says animations, run left, run right, idle left, idle right, we don't have an enumeration for pickup yet. So let's add that here, pickup. And now later, when we want to change the animation to the animation that dissolves, we can say change animation, animations.pickup. Alright? Now, before we start adding all of the logic in the Powerup.cs class, I'd like to just add these orbs to the level. So we need to tell the level editor that we have a new object we want to place, and this is super easy. We'll just right-click Editor, and then say View Code. And then here in this enumeration for object type, here is the enemy that we were adding in the last video. Right after enemy, we can say Powerup, comma. The only warning here is that this needs to be spelled exactly like how you are spelling the class. Because what's going to happen is, in the code below down here, I take everything that's in this enumeration before num of objects. So make sure you never put anything over here past that one, okay? Everything has to go before num of objects. And the reason for that is, remember, these are technically ints. So I'm running a for loop, and I'm saying for int I, for as long as I is less than num of objects. Okay, so I'm kind of hacking that. I iterate through everything in this enumeration, and I add each one of these to the list of things we can add to our level. Okay? So when we press F5 here, after adding this enumeration, we should have the ability to immediately add these power-ups. Okay? I'm going to go to the Objects Create mode here, and notice that down here we have Power-Up, so that's working just like I promised. Let's click Power-Up, and then press Add. It said it couldn't find Power-Up. Oh. Do you know why this is? Because we didn't say powerup.a&m, right? So in the player.cs, notice when we call in the Shy Boy animation, we say shyboy.a&m, but in Powerup, we forgot that extension. My bad. Okay, let's press F5 again. Sorry about that. Okay, now when we go to objects, fingers crossed it works. I'm going to hit add, and check that out. Yeah. It's locking to the grid, and we can place these wherever we want. And because, I'll lay this right here, and because we defaulted the animation to idle left, it's already moving like this. But now we need to detect collisions with the player and make it go away. Okay? Also, if you would want the game object to draw behind the player, you could customize the layer depth values and initialize to be how you want as well. So let's exit out here. Alright, let's go down to the update function here. Let's start off by saying if active equals false, we will return, okay? So once we pick up one of these power-ups, we'll set active to false, and then we'll turn it off and never let it be picked up again. We could also recycle the power-up if you wanted to do that, but I think for this case, we'll just turn it off and say it's off. Let's make a helper function called private void check player collision. Oops. And for that we will pass in, let's just go ahead and pass in both of these, the objects list and the map list. The way I like to do the update functions is not put all of my logic in the main update function. I like to separate it into helper functions like this. That way this looks a little cleaner. We can just say check player collision, objects, map, and then whatever else we need it to do, we can call the other functions below here. But this will be easy. We just need to detect if there's a collision with the player. So remember that the player is always the first objects in the list. So we could just check for a collision with objects at sub-0. So let's just do that. If later on you're wanting to detect collisions with a specific type of object that's not a player, you could just iterate like this through the objects list and then detect for the object. So you could say if objects I is player or is enemy, whatever you're looking for. So if that is true and you detect a collision, then you could do whatever, okay? So I'm just showing you that if in the future you need to find a specific object. But for now, yeah, let's just say if objects 0, which is the player, dot check collision, passing in our bounding box, if that is equal to true, let's say active, no, let's not do that. Because we want to play the animation in the orb first, right? So let's say, let's increase the score. Let's just say player.score ++. And then I'd say we want to immediately change the animation. So let's say change animation. Animations.pickup, right? That's that new one we defined. There's going to be a problem with this, though. Let's think this through. What if on the first frame we detect a collision with the player and we change the animation, and then everything executes and now we're on the next frame and we get to this function again? Chances are the player will still be colliding with the orb, and we're going to increase the score again and change the animation again. So in real time, what's going to happen is the score is going to go up like 200 points or something. That's not what we want. So let's do a check here, and let's say if animation is not animations.pickup, so if we have not picked up this orb yet, and we have detected a collision, then you can add the score and change the animation. Okay? Now we are missing one more piece of logic here. And remember earlier in the animation video, we programmed the animations to loop. So as soon as an animation is up, it will return to the beginning, the very first frame, and repeat. That's not the functionality we want here with this power-up. Okay? We don't want it to dissolve and then immediately come back and dissolve again over and over. That's going to look kind of janky. So what we can do down here in the update animations function, where it says add your animation logic here, let's erase that and let's say if animation complete equals true. So if the current animation that we're in is finished and we're at the last frame, and our current animation, or no, let's say and get animation name animations.pickup, if that is equal to our current animation.name, remember this get animation name function is returning some spaces. It's making this enumeration turn into a string. So if the string of this enumeration pickup, if that is the current animation we are in, we can say change animation, and we could go back to the idle, but in our case we just want to turn off, right? So let's just say active equals false, and that should turn us off. So we will go into the pickup animation and dissolve, and after we dissolve and that animation is finished here, we will turn off this object and say active equals false. Let's press F5 and test this out. I'm going to go to the objects create mode. I'll hit power up. I'll add it. I've placed it, and now I'm going to walk over and see what happens. Awesome. So, it dissolved. We have 1 to the scoreboard, so we got a point, and it went away successfully. There's no weird behavior when we walk over it, even though technically it's still there, right? If you go to the objects list and click power up, see it's highlighted. It's technically still at that position, but it's not drawing or being updated because it's inactive. Cool, cool, cool. I'm going to go ahead and exit out. There's one last thing I'd like to show you guys. I'd like to show you how to play music. So this is really simple. I'd say we can play the music inside of the player class, so let's go to player.cs. I like to play music through the sound effect class because the sound effect class has some more ways to mess with the audio. Remember, you can change the pitch and change the pan, things like that. So that's how I like to play the audio. So just like how we defined a sound effect and played the explosion sound, let's say sound effect song, and then below that let's create a sound effect instance. Let's call this song instance. Now I believe we have already loaded in an audio file here called song.wave in the content folder, so we can just load that in to play as our song. So down here in the load function at the very bottom, I'm going to say load our song, and we can say song equals content.load sound effect, because that's the type of class we're loading in. And then for the path, it's inside of the audio folder. And side note, notice that whenever we are working with the content manager, we never have to put content at the beginning, because really it's in the content folder and audio. That's because the content manager is defaulting in the content folder. Hopefully that makes sense, right? So whenever the content manager starts looking for content, it's already inside of that content folder. So we don't have to redirect it there. So we can just say audio song, just like that. If song instance equals null, so if we have not started an instance of this song, let's say song instance equals song.create instance. So that will create an instance of this song and store it in here. And then later we can use this variable to play the music. But let's go down here, and underneath the update function, let's create a function called private void update music. And to play the song, let's say if song instance dot state is not equal to sound state dot playing. So seeing here, the sound state is the different states the song can be in. You can either pause it or play it or stop it completely. So if we are not currently playing the song, let's say song instance dot play. Oops, typo. Alright. Now you have different things in here on the song instance that you can do. So you can say song instance dot pause. You can mess with the pan and all of that, but let's just see if this starts the song. Actually, one more thing. I'm going to add these brackets. Okay, let's say song instance dot is looped equals true, and this will repeat the song over and over and over. And the song that I gave you is a really basic 3-second loop that I put together really fast. I originally was going to give you a full song, but due to copyright reasons and because it would have been a huge file to put in the toolbox to download, I just made some dorky little 3-second loop. So whenever we say is loop equals true, it should repeat my 3-second song over and over and over. But it's important that you set that to true before you call play. Alright, let's press F5 and see if this works. Oh wait, no, we need to call update music. Alright, let's call update music in the player update, and now we can press F5. Let's see what happens. Alright, it's working. And it's looping too. Nice. Yeah. And I think that's how this video series is going to end. It's going to end with a little party beat like this. Good job, everybody. This was a lot of code, but you have a full engine here. You're ready to make whatever 2D game you want. All of the functionality that you will need to create a 2D game, the animations, the basic collision detection, the basic physics for the characters, the structure to put your objects in, all that stuff is set up. I hope you learned a lot, and hope you had fun. I believe I'll make one more exit video out of this, but for now we're done with the coding. So yeah, let's ride this beat out. Let's ride this beat out. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, one more thing. After such an epic outro there, it's kind of embarrassing I have to come back, but on in your level data.cs class, don't forget to add, every time you create a new object, you have to also put Powerup type of Powerup. Otherwise, your XML stuff will crash whenever you save out a file that has a Powerup in it. Alright? Now you should be good to go. Peace out.